All right, we are live now. Welcome everyone to Ruth chapter 3, Creekwood Online. We are joined by our good friend Jenna Johnson, live from, I guess you're not in Corinth anymore. She's the pastor at Faith United Methodist Church in Corinth up near Denton, but joining us from her own house now. And we might have a guest appearance by her husband is a opera teacher over at, is he still at Commerce?
Yeah.
Yeah, at A&M Commerce. So we might have a guest appearance in the background, which would be par for the course around for us. So that's pretty phenomenal. So as y'all are chiming in, go ahead and comment that you're here. We'd love to know who we're talking to and what's a good, like, just, I don't know, I don't want to call it waste time, but what's a good gathering question for us today, I think. How about in the spirit of opera? You can chime in. What's your favorite opera? And if it's my answer, it would be none.
Have you ever tried
most people's
opera?
answer.
I have. Yeah, I've tried one. I've seen the marriage. We went to early on freshman year at TCU. When I lived on the honors wing in it was actually in the athletes dorm.
Okay.
So
simple brag.
Yeah, so this guy named Jonathan came and rallied everyone to go to the opera, and I was like, well, I can't say no because I'm a freshman in college. I'm going to do whatever anybody invites me to do.
Yeah.
So we went
I
down
used
to
to play in that opera.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did at TCU.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we went down to Bass Hall to the Marriage of Figaro, and it
Mhm.
took me about 5 minutes to realize I was going to hate it.
There are better operas.
Yeah,
I can teach
okay.
you later. Yeah.
And this is coming from somebody who like really loves musical theater. So
Yeah.
Allison Hicks agrees with me. Yeah. Yeah, I got nothing is her exact response.
Yeah, I don't know how many operatic experts with a very musical theater literate congregation, Jenna, but it may stop at Dear Evan Hansen for our folks. It may not extend into operatic work.
Well, I can talk musical theater with you. I actually think that Dear Evan Hansen is better than Hamilton. I think just in terms of what it does to the heart. Yeah, that's the one.
I remember you mentioning that a long time ago with just in terms of the soundtrack and going, I think with what it does to the heart for sure. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. Did you get to see Dear Evan Hansen when it was here last year?
Yes.
Yeah, so good. Oh my gosh, Katrina just texted me. She said, "You have Jenna."
Surprise! Hi, friend.
This is what happens when we were like half working from home and spread out. Is like she doesn't even know you're on Bible study tonight.
Yeah, I'm here. Hey, Kat.
Surprise. So I guess we'll change it to, as you're chiming in here, you can tell us what is your favorite Broadway show or something like that. How about?
Oh man, just one?
Just one. If you had to pick one that you're on a desert island, you can only watch one over and over and over again. Which I think like my easy answer would be Hamilton, just because it is awesome. But if I were to watch it over and over again, I think like Wicked is a really interesting, like Wicked is a really good one, or just like straight out The Lion King.
Yeah.
I'm super into Newsies.
Yes, Newsies.
I was like raised on Newsies. I have watched that over and over again forever.
Right.
They have the like the reunion of the original cast and the movie version on Disney Plus, so you can watch which very different experiences.
So Christian Bale was on Broadway.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I went when that was like in the theater, and there was only like 4 people, and I'm like, the other 96 seats in it, like this was pre-COVID, there was only 4 people in the theater, and I was like, y'all are missing out on like one of the best things. See, I really enjoy listening to Waitress over and over again, which is not super popular, like didn't win a lot, it closed down really early, but I think because Waitress is one of the musicals that I laugh as hard as I cry, and I think like a Dear Evan Hansen, I don't laugh as hard as I cry. It's all feelings. The only other one that I laughed as hard as I cried was Fun Home, which is a total underground, like most people hadn't heard of it, but it was fabulous. And my watching experience of it was really, really unique. So those would maybe be my two. I can't pick just one. Yeah.
So do y'all know Bill Bradford mentioned Come From Away? Have y'all seen that one?
Yeah.
The playbills on my wall.
Okay.
That was
supposed
to be Lessner musicals this season, and they had to cancel it, I think.
Is that the one where
was
the
the
plane
last-
goes to Canada or something?
Yeah, there's like so it's what I saw like the week before shutdown. Like it was the last thing I did before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually reading the book that one of the survivors wrote, that the musical's like, I mean, it's loosely based on all their stories, but the book from one of the guys who's in the musical and his stories told, it's really, really well done. So Bill, that's a great musical.
Cool. Well, all right. I think we can jump into our own little musical theater here in Ruth. That was one of the reasons why we invited Jenna on, is Jenna's got an amazing singing voice. So we were gonna rewrite Ruth to be a musical tonight,
David
starting
will
with
rap,
chapter 3.
Jenna
Absolutely.
will sing. I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
I've got a singing range. I've got a singing range that includes about 2 hymns. Like I think I could do "How Great Thou Art" pretty well, but that's about the extent of my singing ability.
At least it's a standard.
He did come in my office the other day. No, back in like Christmas last year. That's not the other day. That's 100 years ago. And he did start singing "I Want to Dance with Somebody," and it was truly life-changing.
So for those who may be watching that really want an interesting blackmail piece, just look up my friend James Johnson, who is I guess he's not a pastor, but he's on staff at Northside United Methodist in Atlanta. And Jay and I sang "I Want to Dance with Somebody" as a duet at a dive bar called Trackside in Decatur, Georgia during seminary. And it's kind of one of the pinnacles of my life.
You got to set the bar somewhere.
Right. It was, yeah. It was, I don't know if it was a challenge from somebody or if it was just like, hey, let's get up there and sing. And then whatever song comes, we'll happen to wail to it. So
you would have done it either way. Like, I don't feel like it would have taken somebody saying you won't. Like, you just would.
Probably, yeah. No, that's 100% accurate. At least around the right group of people.
True. Facts.
I don't know if I'm the kind of person that would like just go into downtown McKinney and just do it, just to like do it. I'm not a I can't even remember the word, flash mob kind of person. But certainly I got challenged. I mentioned in a sermon one time that I knew the words to Enter Sandman by Metallica just as much as I did to musical theater. So the praise band challenged me afterward to sing Enter Sandman after worship. So there's a video on Facebook of me singing Metallica because I was with the right people at the right time. So anyway, all right, Keri Lynn is going to MC for us tonight. I don't know how to make the transition to Ruth chapter 3 now, but yeah, exactly.
So. I mean, Ruth chapter 3 does feel like a musical. Like this is, perhaps there's a ballad that's sung, but when Naomi's giving instructions to go to the threshing floor, we could get there. I will say my favorite thing on the internet this week, for what it's worth, there is a TikTok where a guy is kind of like poking fun at musical theater, and he writes this goofy ballad about he and his partner breaking up at a grocery store. And then people have added to this video of them singing with him. And so it's like the wife that he's breaking up with, and then the child that's watching them, and the grocery store that's working. And one guy is like the can of soup sitting on the counter, and the squeaky wheel on the cart, and the announcement. And it just like goes from this one goofy guy to like, there's like 10 people in the last little video. So that's what we could have done with Ruth chapter 3, is kind of built this whole musical theater business. That's about as good as transition I can get for you.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, Jenna, is there anything that we forgot to mention in introducing you around all of the craziness?
No, I'm Jenna. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, David through the APL group.
Yes.
Yeah,
and just being around each other for a long time now.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. Cool.
Yeah.
And you've got a husband and a Cute dog. Oh my gosh.
Yes, I have an Australian Shepherd, and it's a good life.
Awesome.
We don't mind being stuck at home so much. That's been a quiet blessing for us.
Nice.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Love that. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we introduced anything else you wanted to say. So we've been walking through all different books really since quarantine started. We did Philippians, and then we did Micah. Then we did, what did we do after that? Mark?
We did Mark, yeah.
Then we did Mark, and so now we're in Ruth. And so just kind of a catch-up moment for everybody if you haven't been watching. So Ruth is kind of this like narrative. I think it's like a dramatic parable, right? We don't concern ourselves with whether these events happened or not, but we look at the way that this book is written to kind of teach us so many different things, right? There are so many, and this chapter in particular, we'll get to this. There are so many ways in which the English language totally fails us when we read Ruth. There are puns and innuendos and weird, like wonderful language things that happen in the original Hebrew that are totally missed in this book. And then even in this chapter, we're going to kind of see like a switch of scene almost. It feels like in a TV show, like we're just going to totally swap to another person's point of view. So it's a really unique book. So just to recap a little bit of the story for everyone. In chapter 1, nothing goes well. Everything's terrible. And lots of death, lots of terribleness, and all of it happens in Moab. And if you're an ancient Israelite reader, you hear Moab, you think danger, danger, danger. And so this Israelite woman, Naomi, is left with her daughter-in-law, Ruth, who over and over and over again, this passage reminds us is a Moabite. And so they go back to Bethlehem because they've heard that famine is over. And Ruth goes out into the grain fields and works in the grain fields and meets this guy named Boaz, who we find out is like somehow kind of related to them. And Boaz takes care of her and feeds her. And when they go home, Ruth tells Naomi all about Boaz, and Naomi's like, this is great. Boaz is going to save us. I think that's chapters 1 and 2. Nothing goes well. Boaz is going to save us. David or Jenna, anything to add on the first 2 chapters of Ruth that I missed?
You did a great, this could be days of our lives. You just did the synopsis at the beginning, and those are the days of our lives. And now I think we're ready. We're ready.
Previously on Bible study.
Right.
Yes, there you go.
Oh, great. So, the way that this works, if you're joining us for the first time, we just kind of we'll read a section and we'll talk about it. And I'll kind of let these 2 pastors do their thing, and I'll be the one kind of guiding us along when it's time to move on. So Jenna, feel free to just go down. We go all down every rabbit trail. I mean, in the first 15 minutes, we've already done that plenty. So, I think this passage, we've only got really like 3 scenes, kind of like Days of Our Lives. We have a 3-scene episode that we'll walk through, and there's just kind of some super random questions that I've got kind of in and around. But again, just to like footnote our resources here, our friend Danielle Kim, who's at Custer Road United Methodist Church, this Bible study she wrote for her Board of Ordained Ministry interview, and she did a really great study on Ruth from the perspective of an immigrant. And so a lot of the questions that I have are informed from Danielle's previous work. So just wanted to make sure we're giving the proper credit and footnotes there. Danielle put together a really great resource that David and I have both used the last couple of weeks. So we're really grateful for her connection and her sharing. Even though we had Danielle on in Mark, I wish we could have her every week in Ruth too, but we have a lot of friends between David and I. So, so this is Ruth chapter 3. We're going to start with verses 1 through 7. And again, I'm reading from the NRSV, but if you're at home and you're reading something different and it's phrased interestingly or phrased differently, always feel free to throw that in the comments. Sometimes seeing how different translations put something help us understand things better. So feel free to jump in with that. And I have no idea what's happening in our comments, but that's hilarious. Yeah. Kathy Bradford, we'll answer your question as we go, the song titles in Ruth the Musical, because I've named all the sections for today. So this first one is called The Plan. So there would be this whole like very intense number with the xylophone maybe about the plan and this dialogue between Naomi and Ruth. So let's read verses 1-7. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter," and she's talking to Ruth, "My daughter, I need to seek some security for you so that it may be well with you. Now here is our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you have been working. See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself and put on your best clothes and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe the place where he lies, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." She said to her, "And that you will tell me I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, he was in a contented mood, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. Okay, so in this section, we're kind of seeing this position. So Naomi's the one that's really in charge through really the first 3 chapters, right? Naomi decides when you're going back to Bethlehem. And Ruth, right in chapter 1, we remember Ruth promises to go with Naomi, like, "I'm going to do whatever you do. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." I remember that verb in there that says that Ruth clung to Naomi is the same from the other Old Testament passages that we hear about husband and wife, about clinging together, leaving your parents and clinging to your spouse. And so Naomi's kind of calling the shots. But I think what's happening, we talked a little bit about this last week, but they're in kind of survival mode. You know, these 2 women who have no men in their family that they're marrying or falling back on are living a really dangerous situation without protection. And Ruth going in the fields and being able to glean every day is providing like daily solutions to this problem. But Naomi here comes with a solution that's she says, "I need to seek security for you so that it may be well with you." And I think she's kind of looking for a long-term solution, really for both of them. So Naomi suggests, it reads weird to the modern reader. Naomi suggests very risky behavior here, like super not ideal, super like rated R, super like don't be listening to this when you're putting the kids to bed. So when there's the word uncover, the word feet, and the words lie down in Hebrew all have wildly sexual overtones. And I'm just going to let everybody be free to Google those themselves rather than spending a ton of time. But yes, it's exactly what you're thinking it is. And so Naomi is telling her daughter-in-law, who just lost her husband, to go and engage in this wildly risky behavior, right? And Ruth's fate rests in Naomi's hands. And she pledged that in chapter 1. So in verse 3, one of the things that Naomi suggests is that you will wash and anoint yourself and put on your best clothes and go down to the threshing floor. So there's kind of this twofold meaning in Old Testament scripture where we see this washing and anointing yourself. And the first, this process took place when somebody was at the end of mourning. Remember, like in Jewish culture, like mourning is not a single day when an incident happens, but it's an amount of time, right, depending on the incident. But the second time that somebody would kind of wash and anoint themselves for this is for a wedding. And so the smart Bible people I read for this week suggest that both interpretations can be seen this way, right? Is Naomi suggesting, all right, you need to get over your husband who passed away, it's time to move on, and you need to marry Boaz? Or is it just that she's going with the idea of wanting to marry Boaz? So I kind of wanted to ask this question to you two about, and David noted this a little bit last week, you know, is Ruth, in the context of the narrative, really given appropriate time to grieve and to mourn, even for a Moabite that wouldn't take part in these Israelite and know these Jewish traditions? And then kind of the follow-up contextual question is, how have you seen or experienced, or in the most ideal sense, a created space for people to mourn and to mourn well?
Yeah. So I'll go with just, I think, the easy answer for whether Ruth is allowed to mourn or grieve, and I think absolutely not. And I'll go back to what I said last week, is that I'm not even sure why the book is named Ruth, because she's kind of just a vehicle in the story as opposed to really, I mean, I think she takes a little bit of empowerment, but it's all for the benefit of Naomi. And so there's kind of that generosity, but at the same time, I mean, getting ahead of myself next week, it's really about the lineage of Boaz, or and the salvation of Naomi. And so she's a vehicle for that. And in so, the narrator doesn't give her a whole lot of time to like collect herself after the death of her husband, or before she. That honestly, when I was thinking about this today, it reminds me of that Reba McEntire song "Fancy," of like, here's your one dress, here's your one chance, like, don't let me down, right? Yes. So it kind of reminded me of that moment of, you know what, it's make or break, and this is your opportunity. He's going to be drunk, he's going to be in the place where things happen, and so this is your opportunity to make something happen, and you don't do it now, it's not going to happen, and we're going to be destitute. So I think there is some element of anoint yourself for the wedding, I hope, is going to happen, but there's a lot of pressure on, if it doesn't happen, we're gone.
I actually, so I've been thinking about this, and I feel like in a lot of senses, time to grieve and mourn is a privilege that not everyone actually has access to. And so even if you think about what's accessible to us now, taking time to grieve is only accessible to a certain percentage of people. It's not actually accessible to everyone. And so I think, especially people who live like Ruth and Naomi were living, from meal to meal, paycheck to paycheck perhaps, but really, that subsistence kind of living, grief is a luxury that, gosh, I wish that she had time to mourn, but I wonder if this is actually really indicative of what the experience of a lot of women in particular is like when it comes to losing somebody who cares for them and who knows how to pay the bills. I mean, how often, David, have you had somebody who loses a loved one and they don't know any of the passwords to the bank account?
Right.
And,
yeah.
And all of a sudden, the person who's been taking care of business is gone, and you don't have the same luxury of grief as some other people might have. And so,
right.
I was thinking about this and thinking like, yeah, she's totally in survival mode, like most people are when they lose a loved one. And a lot of people don't have months to wait to find another solution.
Right.
I really, that felt really clear to me, I think, when I was reading this week for this.
And I always see kind of those situations play out when we're getting ready for the funeral. Is, funeral will be a week or two after someone passes away, and there's kind of the craziness of trying to orchestrate travel and trying to plan the ceremony, and in the midst of that, it's like recovering old photos and trying to find all the business details and everything. And I think that's why, like, the funeral moment is so important, is that it is a carved out time, even if it's only 30 minutes or an hour. It's a carved out time where nothing is expected of them, and they're allowed to feel deeply what it means to not have this person sitting next to them anymore, and to give them to God in a way, to know that, like, because the whole week or two leading up to that is, I am in survival mode and I'm trying to keep control over everything. And the funeral is kind of this, I'm able to give it a little bit to God and recognize God's providence in this. But then what's beautiful afterward is the community scene at the reception. And this is where Ruth didn't have either of them. So Ruth never has like that funeral moment of giving her husband to God. She chooses Naomi right after that. She puts herself in this situation, but or is found in this situation. But then I guess the women who are with her are the best example I can think of as how to help mourn. Is you get in that reception and everybody's just sharing these wild stories of what they, and the best times are when like somebody's old frat brothers come and they're like, hey, you never heard this story, but let me tell it to you now. And so it just is this rekindling, and so I think, to kind of answer it, when I've seen the mourning happen the best is, I would imagine it's a little bit like the women who take Ruth. I'm not sure if we've had that yet. I think we have, or maybe that's in chapter 4. But
No, we just have the women in chapter 1 that tell Naomi she looks awful. So I don't think you're talking
oh
about them.
no, I'm not talking about them. That's the worst of what it
That
happens.
also happens at funerals sometimes.
That does happen at funerals too. Okay, so I'm jumping the gun, but there's women in that kind of adopt Ruth and nurture her, and that's where I've seen mourning happen the best is when you have, on one hand, you have people who say it's okay to hurt, and the same people are also saying, but let's find the bank account passwords.
Mm.
And so they let you have your moments, but they never let you stay there. They kind of point to life that is continuing.
Yeah, I think a lot of times grief has to happen like 15 minutes at a time.
Yeah.
That, you know, that part of what we have to do with when we don't have the luxury of taking time to grieve and we're in survival mode is that we have to do 15 minutes at a time. And sometimes it's 15 minutes of grief, and other times it's 15 minutes of figuring out how to fix the thermostat, right? So like, it's just that I think, you know, some of the things I know that you guys have probably experienced too is that what people are most grateful for as they're grieving is somebody who will take 4 minutes to say, hey, how are you? I bet you miss your mom. And that kind of experience of grief is actually, I mean, that's in line with where we are now. And I think that there's some of that with Ruth and Naomi as Naomi is recognizing, they're recognizing that pattern in their own life, that she's not just like storming through the gates. There is still the recognition of what's been lost. And I wonder if that is also really a more possible way of grief that we know and have access to in our own lives.
Well, and Jenna, do you find it's true that, so like the thermostat, right? So I'm thinking this is not probably the first time Ruth has done manual labor. Like I'm assuming that was part of the role on her farm in Moab or whatever that you know, so I'm imagining she's harvesting wheat or barley or something and maybe having, you know, she might be in survival mode, but it also is like, oh my gosh, I used to do this with whatever mourning or agony the guy was name. And so it's the person who takes 4 minutes out and allows you to not experience grief in a functional sense, but grief in a real soul sense. So it's not that I have to do everything and survive by myself. It's that I actually get to reflect on the person that I miss.
True. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think in my experience too, and this is one thing that I always tell people, and it's funny because I've lived it like from 2 very different sides. So everybody's there in the first 15 minutes. Like it's almost overwhelming. When I've experienced a loss, like the day of, like my phone blew up, and when you're living by 15 minutes, you don't have energy to reply to 17 text messages. And so what I've really come to appreciate is the friends that check in like 6 months after something, because no one's asking 6 months later. It almost feels like you can't bring it up. And so for somebody to come in, and Jen, I really like the way that you, instead of asking like, oh, how are you? Because like, that's a really loaded question. There's a lot that's happened in 6 months. But then to say like, hey, I bet you miss your mom right now. You know, I love that in our tradition, we're coming up on All Saints Day. And that's a day where we allow everybody to bring it up, whether the loss was on November 2nd of last year or October 31st of this year, like any time in the last year, you know, we're allowed to bring it up. So that's one thing I would encourage everybody to think about, you know, because even as a pastor, people are like, what can we do for so-and-so? And I'm like, give her 3 months. And they're like, wait, why? I'm like, because we're 3 month people. We're 6 month people. We're 1 year people. We started sending with our care team. They had the idea to start sending notes to people on an anniversary of losing someone. And we have found that those have probably been more impactful than the ones that they get in the couple of weeks after. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Yeah. Kathy Bradford, 6 months and on the anniversary of major holiday. Birthdays and the anniversary of the loss, or an anniversary between 2 people. Absolutely. That's a really great point to bring up. And I put those in my calendar. Like, it's really weird, but like, I literally have in my Google Calendar, like, when my friend's dad died, to remind myself to check in on him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a weird thing, but it is one of those ways that helps me be more intentional, because I'll totally forget otherwise.
Yeah.
It's also why Google Calendars are a wonderful tool.
You can color code it. Oh gosh. Okay. So one of the ways in which we can interpret the word uncover, and here is, for one, like, again, wild sexual overtones. It's exactly what you think it is, right? When it says that Ruth went to uncover him. But one of the ways in which it also can be interpreted in this is the word recover. And we're going to kind of play with this a little bit in the rest of chapter 3. But Ruth really does experience some kind of recovery with Boaz. And even up to this point, the way that Boaz has treated her just as a stranger in the land, Boaz has done what the law requires of how Israelite people are to treat foreigners in their land, right? So one of the things that Danielle did a really great job to indicate in her study is sometimes Ruth unintentionally is used with folks who live in immigrant experience to teach them that Ruth is the model minority, is what Danielle wrote about. And she really uses her study to kind of uncover the model minority myth of Ruth, because this story has been used almost to really hurt folks who are living that experience. So I'd love for us, and I recognize that it's a very loaded question. I'm assuming I know correct that like none of the three of us live an immigrant experience currently or have in the past. So we're
I think that's safe.
Yeah. Like, we'll just name that the three of us don't have a full comprehensive answer of this, at least from experience, which is why I have the two questions that I have, because I think we can speak to the second part. But
I did live outside of Texas, I will add. I mean, I lived outside of Texas, which is as close as I can say. Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I've never
You were
lived
smart.
outside of Texas.
Yeah.
So I just want to talk about this model minority myth, particularly in the context of this. And again, like, Ruth clings to Naomi, but Jenna, I think you put it so beautifully, like, that's out of total necessity. It's out of total and complete, like, lack of time. It is a paycheck to paycheck kind of feel that I've never experienced. Like, I've always had the safety net kind of deal as well. And so I just want us to discuss a little bit, kind of in the question, is Ruth really a good example of how we expect people to behave when they are the minority? And then the second, is Naomi a good example of who we should be when we are the majority, and kind of a why or why not follow up to that?
So when you say expect, do you mean expect from the ideal standpoint, or how we expect from a cultural standpoint, but even though it may not be the best? Both. Okay. You're welcome to start, Jenna, if you want to.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I can.
Please go ahead, please.
Yeah. So on some level, yes. It was interesting. I was reviewing parts of Leviticus 19 for the sermon on Sunday, where there's all these laws on basically just how to treat each other, and it's where part of when Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor. That comes from Leviticus 19, and there's many different ways that plays out about not defrauding each other and everything. Well, then you get into Leviticus 19, I think it's 23, and it says, now the alien amongst you, make sure that, basically the alien has like the right to vote and the right to eat and the right to have all the decision. It's really interesting on the reaction of the Israelites coming out of Egypt, where they were aliens and they were enslaved. And the reaction to that is, well, no, we want to have a society or a gathering that anybody who joins us is welcome to take part in fully. So it's interesting that that's the ideal, but Ruth still lives this kind of other quote another's experience, right? She still has this immigrant experience in which, so she's allowed to glean like a poor person. But I'm curious if, yeah, so I'm just like from the other, I think if, say, Naomi inherited a whole bunch and Ruth was clinging to Naomi, would Ruth still be required to glean, or would she be accepted as equal amongst everyone if she had resources, kind of thing? And so I think and one of the reasons why I asked the expected question is I think we have, at least in the United States, and probably most other countries, but at least in the United States, this kind of mythology of the Irish coming over from the potato famine. And we have the mythology of the Italians coming over after, hardship in Italy. And we have the mythology of the Mexican immigrant coming in, right? And so everybody's coming to us for a better life. And the meritocracy of it all says well, yeah, we're giving you all the opportunity in the world, so we expect them to struggle. And so when we see somebody who doesn't look what our version of an American would look like, and I'm assuming maybe New Zealand or other places are the same, is when we see somebody who doesn't look like we expect them to look, we expect them to struggle. And we don't necessarily always live into well, no, you're here now, so let's integrate you as, let's have the equality. That was a long-winded answer. So
I agree with all of that. And for me, I think that the way that I would answer would also be based on how we interpret the actions of Ruth and Naomi prior to this point. Because, right, you said, which is true, that there are like 17 layers that are going on at this story at once. This is not like one way that you can see it. Every word means 4 different things, and it's playing on old stories. And right, there's so much depth to it. And there's really, this whole argument that's been going on for a long time about whether or not Ruth was tricked into acting the way that she was, like forced, manipulated, or whether she just has some chutzpah, right? Like there's this whole conversation about her control over her life and whether or not she did this because it was something that she felt called to do and that Naomi was just speaking truth to her. So right, there's this whole, there's this double side to this in the way that it's been interpreted for a really long time. And I think that based on which view of the actions of these women prior to this point, I think that really impacts the way that we understand, the way that they should and should not be acting and accepted into society, which I understand, and I think is really problematic. That intention is what sets the way that a person should be welcomed in or not. And I just think that there's so much nuance to that we should really probably spend like 4 hours just talking about that point, because it's not black and white and even really gray. It's like red and purple and all the chaos. Yeah.
All right, everybody, we'll be going to 11 o'clock tonight. So buckle in, get your favorite drink out, and enjoy.
I'm gonna need more.
You're gonna need more coffee there. I'm really thankful to Danielle's curriculum on this, just because I have lived the majority experience in just about every way that I possibly could have in my life. And so I would have never thought about Ruth as the model minority, or even how we treat her as a minority. And so, I mean, we talked about the generous daughter-in-law, or the loyal daughter-in-law motif and everything that I've always heard this is interpreted as. So I was really thankful to have that other voice to point that out, which is one of the reasons why doing Bible study in like a diverse community is a really wonderful thing. Because it's only been close to 6 to 7 years in which I finally started to understand mission as like the best way to do mission is not to go in and fix everybody's problems as the majority or the powerful. But the best way to do missions is to set up, well, how can we use our wherewithal to empower them to do it, the best way they know how to do it. And that's where I feel, that's what's interesting about Naomi and Ruth's relationship here too, is like the foreword in my Bible to Ruth says Ruth takes advantage of this Israelite custom and Israelite law, and it seems to give the power to Ruth. But then when you read the story, it's like, no, Naomi says, here are some shoes. Let's do this the easy way. And so there very much still is a majority minority relationship there again, which I'm pointing forward toward chapter 4, but Ruth basically gets cut out of the story after this.
Yeah.
My apologies. I have a very naughty dog who decided to totally chew up and start choking on a phone charger.
Oh, awesome.
Good. Yeah.
It was, my bad for leaving it on the couch, like tucked behind it out of sight, that was on me, I guess.
Of course it is. Yeah. It's never the pet's fault.
No, she's too cute for that. Okay. So sorry about that. Pardon my leaving frantically. Had to save a life.
I'll say as a side note that I saw my next door neighbor I know had a dog, but I've never actually seen this dog. And we were walking back I was getting Arden from a friend's house just a couple hours ago, walked back, and I see this little like stick looking thing sitting up in the passenger seat of the guy's truck. And I really was curious, and it took me a while to realize that this was a dog. And it's about as skinny as a stick and kind of looks like a Twinkie. But it was the
Is it a smallest dog?
Yeah, I asked him, I said, "Oh, you got a puppy?" And he was like, "No, it's a couple years old." Just like, all right, anyway, that was a really weird aside, but yeah, it was the craziest dog I've ever seen.
Yeah. Anyways, sidebar, Rosie is fine. She just is
good.
She doesn't like it when I'm on Zoom. Like she's not a fan of when I'm not giving her my full undivided attention. So she chewed up a phone charger to let me know. So we need to move on. I know that we could talk about, so any other last thoughts on verses 1 through 7? Jenna, did you have any last response to David's? Okay. Nope. Cool. Then I'm going to move us on to verses 8 through 13. Kathy Bradford, my title for this section is called Recovering Midnight. So whatever.
That's a Broadway song.
I do what I can. Whatever power ballad. I think maybe this is like instrumental that leads into like a solo, and then like the like scenery is like you turn around, you're no longer in the house, but you're on the threshing floor with Boaz. There's like this beautiful like magical moment, right? I'm just coming up with this on the fly. This is not what happens in my brain. So I appreciate the prompt here. So this is verses 8 through 13. So it says, at midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and there lying at his feet was a woman, which this is funny to me because I feel like it is total scene shift. Like we are now from Boaz's perspective a little bit. Like it doesn't say, and there was Ruth, who we learned one verse ago was lying at his feet. It's total like screen swipe. We're in a whole other thing. So there lying at his feet was a woman. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin." He said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. This last instance of your loyalty is better than the first. You have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask, for all the assembly of my people know that you are a worthy woman. But now, though it is true, I am a near kinsman, there is another kinsman more closely related than I. Remain this night, and in the morning, if he will act as next of kin for you, good, let him do it. If he is not willing to act as next of kin for you, then, as the Lord lives, I will act as next of kin for you. Lie down until the morning." So we have this narrator shift, and again, like the English language is killing me with Ruth. Like I wish that we spoke Hebrew and we could read that. So one of the things I really, really, really love, up to this point, almost every time that Ruth has been mentioned, her status as a Moabite has been attached to her name. And here she identifies herself. She says her own name, and it is, "I am Ruth." And that's the first thing said about her. And I just appreciate what happens here because Ruth kind of goes off script from Naomi's instructions. And she tells Boaz what to do. Again, in this whole kind of first 2.5 chapters, where Ruth is just kind of an instrument of what's going on. I think we do have what we can choose to see as a redemptive moment, even though it's a little strange. And like the whole situation is not ideal, but she does kind of take some control here. And whether it's good or bad, we can discuss, but she says her name, which is not just her status, and she takes control of her own destiny, and she tells Boaz what to do. And Boaz kind of talks to her about her in some ways that are just interesting to note. So in verse 11, people know that you are a worthy woman. So her reputation for being a loyal person to Naomi is what people know of her. And that's a reframing of the way in which Israelite people view Moabites. Again, like in this time in Israel, if you were hearing a story about something happening in Moab, like nothing good happens in Moab. Like just none of it goes well. Moabites, any run-in with them never ends great. And so for Ruth to be, again, working so hard, but to see a little bit of a glimpse that it is working, her reputation is that she is loyal, that she's this good person, is said about her. So one of the things that Ruth, again, is asking for here is redemption, right? So what's happening here, what she's asking Ruth to do, and I may totally mispronounce, but levirate marriage, which is ancient Near East culture. So if you married someone, if you were a woman and you married a man and the man passed away, his brother was supposed to marry you. And then if that guy passed away, then his brother was supposed to marry you. And it kind of kept going till you ran out of men, I'm pretty sure. And it sounds cute, like, oh, we're keeping them in the family. But it's really just to make sure that the inheritance stays in the family. It's not even about the family name. It's more about what's given to the man for in the words of inheritance. And so Naomi in this situation is not eligible for this kind of passing down of marriage of women because she's too old to have children now. Because again, women in this time are property, and their value is based upon their ability to have children, to create more men to pass off inheritance and women to have as property. So what's interesting here is the way in which Boaz is related. He's not required even by levirate marriage. He's not in the line. He's not a brother. And so this isn't even required of him, what he's promising to do. And I don't know about like the other family member that he's talking about. It sounds like that it wouldn't be required of him either. He's just closer related. Which Boaz's ability to have the family tree memorized in the middle of the night is pretty impressive.
And he's drunk.
And he's drunk and waking up at midnight and there's a girl hanging out there. Like, it's just a weird day. But Boaz kind of goes beyond, or at least promises at this point beyond the kind of regular call of duty here. And so, where did my questions go? Okay, so, and Jenna, I think you said it earlier, the Hebrew word is, how do you pronounce that? The loving kindness is hesed? Hesed?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So that's a word like that's all in and out of Daniel's study and is used to describe loving kindness of Ruth, the way that Ruth clings to Naomi and kind of Ruth's reputation that kind of weaves in and out of this. And so her loving kindness, her hesed, is what exceeds her reputation as a Moabite. It exceeds her reputation as an unmarried woman who hasn't had children yet. So just kind of almost like, and I hate to say like softball question, but what is something in life or in ministry that you've seen that is just something that people think is so bad, danger, 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 that has actually become something that has shown loving kindness to people?
I think framing that has said that loving kindness, again, that's like you said, that's one of those words that like is really lost in translation. So I think it's helpful when we talk about it. It's like loyalty, steadfastness. So steadfast is actually one of my favorite words that we use in the English language to describe who God is and what God does. And there are all these theologians and biblical scholars who actually talk about this hesed love as one of the primary attributes of who God is. That it's about loyalty, it's about covenant, it's about steadfastness, it's unending. There isn't an end point in sight to that actually, and that's where that really standard based on Psalm 139, His love endures forever, right? That's hesed love. That's what that's based off of, and I just think all of the time about moments in which people have been asked to take on great responsibility, almost to their chagrin, and have found that in that responsibility that they might not have even taken it because of this steadfast love, but they took it on because it was a responsibility, it was a covenant that they needed to fulfill, and that in the fulfilling that covenant, in that act, there's actually been this great blessing, this great opportunity for growth and for patience and for all of that stuff. I think that happens a lot in our lives, that we feel like we get stuck with something that we have to do just because we have to do it. It's a requirement for us just to like survive. And the cynic in me says that most of the time we make these choices because of that obligation, not because of our hesed. But that when we make those kind of choices, that we're really, I hate to use reward language, but in which, we're more aware of the way that we are being blessed by God, and that the Holy Spirit is moving when we choose to love that way.
Yeah, no, you put it really, really great. I'm just thinking about, I've mentioned on here before about, I quickly learned that my calling was not to be a youth minister. I enjoyed my time being a youth minister, but I realized like it wasn't for the long term. It wasn't what God was really energizing me for. And so when I was in Kansas was the last time that I really was primarily doing youth ministry. And I would have been fine canceling youth group every night. I planned meticulously throughout the week, and I knew that, we had increasing numbers and everything was going great, but every Sunday afternoon, I just wanted to watch football and not go back up to church and not do anything. But out of like basically obligation, we would have some of the greatest experiences ever. And I've talked about these three kids a lot in ministry, but there's a kid named Michael, a kid named Robbie, and a kid named Steve. And they're the only three kids I know who have ever been banned from church camp. And, but they showed, I think the guy before me, his name is Gary, he showed steadfast love to these three, that even though they got kicked out of church camp, he just was so loving to these three that they in turn learned this same kind of steadfast love for the church. And so by the time I got there, these three guys were like leaders in the youth group, even though they were all misfits. And I don't think they would have ever gotten there had they not been kicked out of church camp. And so they got to experience that grace. They got to experience the steadfast love that really does endure forever, regardless of what we decide to do or not decide to do. So it was really a beautiful, every Sunday night I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. Then until next Sunday afternoon. And all. So it was really, you put it really great.
I think also something that just feels relevant as I'm listening to you talk about it is that so many people in my church right now are in the weird space where they are now parenting and taking care of their parents. And for a lot of people, that labor, that shifting into caring for your parent, no one really wants to do that. And yet most people who go about the business, especially in the end of helping a loved one die well, that's just an incredible gift that we would often not choose. But when we love in such a way that we make that choice, even when it's uncomfortable, there is just rich, abundant blessings when we choose to show up in those moments. For a lot of people, not always, but for a lot of people.
For a lot of people.
Yeah,
So one of the interesting things that I learned about this earlier, that is interesting because Jenna, you were talking about things we don't really want to do, and maybe even things that startle us, that maybe we get asked to be on a team or serve in some way, and we're just absolutely scared. And there's some understanding of, in other scriptures, the midnight is when death comes. So like in this kind of Hebrew mythology, midnight is when death comes. And so when Boaz awakes at midnight and there's this woman, from Isaiah, it's Lilith, and it's this like demonic angel female thing. And he's startled at first, but then all of a sudden, out of the startledness, is jarred into a new reality of loyalty that, from Ruth. So it is interesting how something that completely shocks us and surprises us can often be the best thing that ever happened.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads to the next question I want to ask. So what Ruth does here, and the threshing floor, just like that I read today that I thought was interesting. Like if you saw a guy and a girl coming out of the threshing floor, like usually like that was a woman of questionable morals and a man who made a questionable choice, to put it again, like delicately. And so what's happening is interesting because the choices that Ruth makes, whether she's aware or not, or whether she's a pawn in the game, are scandalous, right? It would definitely be something that we would talk about. Oh, did you see so and so and so and so at this place? And yet it is this hesed, it is this loving kindness that she's known for, that he knows her for, that really is, I think, she's following her mother-in-law's instructions. I think it is this clinging to Naomi, that Ruth follows what Naomi says, even to the point of not following what Naomi says and taking things into her own hands to tell Boaz, this is what you're going to do, pal. And it's this intensity towards safety. And if you've ever, even just been hiking and been without water, like the way in which like you will move to go and get water, is a different kind of survival, right? And folks who live experiences where they are living paycheck to paycheck, sometimes the choices that have to be made for survival are scandalous and are gossip worthy, and or we find them to be gossip worthy. They are not actually. So kind of the follow-up question I have is, how have you seen, or how would you like to see, maybe in a more ideal sense, kind of this active hesed or this active loving kindness with the remainder of 2020? With everything we have between here and the end of the year.
Yeah.
So there's a picture that well, on the news it says it's going viral. I haven't been on social media enough to know if it's really going viral or not, and I'm not sure I'm connected into all the right avenues anyway, but it's it's just it's a white woman with a Trump sign and a black woman with a Biden sign. Both of them have stars and stripes on their clothes, and they're kneeling next to each other, and apparently they're next door neighbors somewhere in the South somewhere. And they're apparently like best friends. And they're voting for different people. They talk about it all the time. They've got their own reasons. They also recognize the ambiguities with these candidates. But they've actually done, like, they've established the loyalty before they've criticized the other person. And they've recognized their own hypocrisy in their own choice as well. So it's this absolute, and I think steadfast love has to be built on humility with the other person. So, and I would say that God does that with us. So that's what I would love to see is, I don't know if it'll actually make it into the sermon this week, but I've been wondering today about why, when we're scrolling through social media, when it's someone we don't even know, do we get so offended we have to stop and respond? And what I would love to see is that we stop responding and we start relating, I guess, first and foremost. Like that's the loving kindness thing I'd like to see. I know the election ends November 3rd, but I don't think the vitriol is going to stop after that. I'm just flat out tired of it.
Yeah.
And it would be really it would be inspiring to see a movement of the Spirit in not the political realm, but in the relational realm around politics. It would be really inspiring to see people drop their guard.
Yeah, I just have been thinking about so much how this conversation for me goes back to the conversation we were having earlier around grief and the way we show up for each other in 15-minute increments. And I think that right now, the way that we so function in the universe is like in this 15 minutes now, and we forget that we belong to each other. And that has said, like, this loving kindness actually demonstrates to us not that just that it's about us and what's going on, but that we belong to each other. And so I think that, one of the things I feel like is lost so much now is nuance, and that there are so much of the way that we communicate with each other in which we leave out the nuance of life. And we need nuance to help us understand grief and to help us understand each other. And really, I just feel like, this scandalous act of love that happens in Ruth 3 is very, it's the same scandalous love that we see with Jesus on the cross. And it's the same scandalous love that would show up if we chose to accept nuance and to show up for each other in 15-minute increments, 3 months down the road, not just in the immediate. And if we would do that kind of showing up with that almost you know what? It is scandalous in a lot of ways for people to choose to still love each other and be in relationship, even after they find out that they disagree on gun control, right? Or abortion or whatever the hot topic thing is, to choose to belong to each other, even in spite of and because of those differences, I just think would be an incredible gift that we could give to a community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that, and Jen, I appreciate you putting it bluntly like that, right? Like, I think a lot of the time, I think a lot about what are we teaching the generation that comes after us, and one of the things that I'm afraid that we're teaching our children, or I'm everyone's eccentric aunt, so our nieces and nephews, we're teaching them that conflict ends relationships. And if y'all think millennials have problems with commitment, we're about to see a wave of young adults who are going to be under the impression that conflict ends relationships. And what an atrocious grievance we are committing in teaching, even in the church, right? Like, church history is just conflict ending relationships. Right? It just is the question of which conflict ends this one. And there's good that comes out of separation. And there are some good things, obviously, in church history. I'm glad that certain sectors of Christianity left other sectors so I could be ordained one day eventually, right? Like, but I think a lot about even my tendency to see fight or conflict as, well, you're just disappointed in me all the time now, aren't you? You just hate me all the time now, don't you? You only think of that one embarrassing moment that I had that one time, don't you? And we're not teaching those who are coming after us how to continue in relationship, even with hot button conflict, not just like, oh, you didn't take the dishes out of the dishwasher, but like, we have different stances on gay marriage. We have different stances on abortion and gun control. We voted for different people in 2016 and 2020. And those sound like deal breakers to us. Like, it's almost a knee-jerk reaction. But we are teaching people that conflict ends relationships, and that makes me really sad.
I also just wonder if there's an important distinction that we need to make, based on some of the words that I used earlier that has said is about loyalty. But I worry that in the conversation around loyalty, that means that we just have to like stand behind and beside our people no matter what. And that has said, actually, like, this kind of covenantal relationship actually looks more like belonging to each other, like good accountability, like radical acceptance and generosity, and also truth telling. And also honesty. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make, especially in the confines of this conversation, That it doesn't just mean that we have to pretend everything is okay. That's not actually what this kind of love is. It's really about having the nuanced conversation and choosing to be together anyway, instead of ignoring the conversation and pretending like there's nothing going on.
Right. And two, I think to your point, it also doesn't mean that we need to expect all of the people around us not to bring up the things that are in conflict, so it won't end. Like, my opinion's not correct.
Oh, welcome back.
Hello.
Sorry. Okay. My opinion is not correct because it's mine. And those who are my friend and who engage in a relationship with me don't have to have my opinion to continue to be in relation. Like, it's not a dominant, submissive piece. And I think that language of belonging to each other is so powerful, and it's almost as hard to imagine right now.
Yeah.
And I'm really glad you brought up that point, because even as I was talking, I was like, this is getting into a territory that I don't totally agree with myself 100% what I'm saying. Anyways, David, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to say there's a really great piece, and it's incredibly slanted for those of you who pay attention to politics and might get unloyal or mad. But David Brooks wrote it for The Atlantic, and I like David Brooks' writing most of the time. I think he's well thought out, even if I don't agree with him all the time. And but he wrote about the moral problem in America, and I can't remember what he talked about. Some of it was around racism, but a lot of it was around in the end of the 20th century, for whatever reason. Like, so we had like the social movements of the 60s and 70s. And then somehow or another, in the end of the 20th century, we decided that if everybody just did what they wanted to do and thought was best, that everything would kind of magically work out. And so we went to this incredible, and you hear about this in the 80s, right? The 80s are the era of me and the individualism. And so we went to this whole generation that just assumed that if I take care of my stuff and my family the way I want to do it, it will all just kind of work out. And he shows how that attitude just absolutely has led to destruction on multiple levels. And people who grew up in that era, like you're saying, Keri, Lynn, people who grew up in that era have to relearn the idea that we belong to each other and the social contract, and that the social contract isn't just my expectation of you. The social contract is this agreed upon set of principles that's either handed down by God or agreed upon by the people. And so it was just really enlightening in terms of at least our culture and our society about what y'all are both talking about, that how we choose to relate to each other has incredible lasting impacts. And the fact that like Ruth and Boaz are walking out of here and it doesn't immediately say, and Boaz explained every detail and had body cam footage, right? It just says this was a gray area that we walked out on, and it could have been part of the Me Too movement. It could have been part of all of these things. And yet they moved forward with steadfast love, trusting that they were going to belong to each other, despite the appearances of what people could have accused them of. So I think, so I just think the idea of what you said about conflict, I think conflict, most of the best art comes out of conflict. And so I think the fact that we're not embracing gray areas and the fact that we're not embracing conflict is only going to harm us.
So I need to move us along because we will run out of time. Although Jenna, we had a chapter in Mark that did have like 90 something verses. And our guest that week was Edgar Bazan.
Oh, I love him. Yeah.
Yeah. He was so great. But at one point I was like, boys, we have to move on.
Yeah, that sounds right too.
Spectacular. Yeah. Okay, so this is going to be verses 14 through 18. So this is the rest of chapter 3. So she lay down, he says, hey, we'll take care of you, lay down until morning. So she laid down at his feet until morning, but got up before one person could recognize another. And that just means before the sun came up. That's a really weird way of translating that. Where he said, it must not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. Again, guy and a girl at the threshing floor, they were almost always not doing their taxes.
So I was wrong about that.
Then he said, bring the cloak you are wearing and hold it up. What?
I just said I was wrong about the cover up there. I forgot this part. So my bad.
No worries. Whatever. So then he said, bring your cloak you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her back, and then he went into the city. She came to her mother-in-law, who said, how did things go with you, my daughter? Which, just pause. What a great moment of Naomi relating to Ruth in this moment and calling her my daughter. Not the Moabite, not no name, but a relational term here. How did things go with you, my daughter? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, for he said, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. And she replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but he will settle the matter today. So a couple of things here. So I really like this idea of Boaz showing genuine concern for Ruth in a couple of different areas in this, for her good reputation to remain, for one, but also sending her back with a physical, with food that she needed. But the reason for sending it was to not go back to Naomi empty-handed. And Naomi in chapter 1 used the word empty to describe how she felt about all that she had lost. And so again, like, the poetry in this book is really incredible, because Boaz is proving he's going to be the redeemer for both of them, not just for Ruth, but also for Naomi. So her previous emptiness is something of the past, right? Even in Boaz, are we going to find that even Naomi's emptiness is going to be no more? Interesting, the rest of the passage, this is the last time we hear the 2 women speak. All of chapter 4, we just hear of what happens to them. And again, like, the book of Ruth is weird. Like, we don't really get any insights into like what these women like feel about what happens to them. It just reads like a very simple, like, just this is what happened, this is what they said. But Naomi's advice to Ruth is to sit and to watch what happens here. So there's kind of some suspense. Like, we get this hint that in the person of Boaz, both of the women's problems will be solved. But it is kind of a Rapunzel in her tower, sit and wait moment that we have, that the reader kind of, the author of this chapter, I think, just goes about in a really interesting way. Like, the sitting and waiting for the day is not something like totally necessary to the story, for such a short book. But to kind of include this discussion of just, wait until we see how this works out. He's probably going to handle it today. And again, for whoever put in the chapters later to decide that's where chapter 3 was going to end, is another interesting choice as well. So one of the things, and I'm switching the questions around that I sent them to you all, so sorry. But again, this scandalous choice of the threshing floor and what typically happened when people were together on the threshing floor and when they were coming out, and Ruth is having to go home before it's light outside, and just this whole kind of scandalous moment. One of the kind of questions I was wrestling with after reading a commentary is, is the redemption in this story granted because of good choices, and is it reframing the scandalous choices that culture says in this story are scandalous are good choices, or is the redemption being offered even in spite of the choices that even Naomi tells Ruth to make in this, the way she goes about approaching Boaz?
So I think there's a little bit of both, which is a good Methodist answer, I guess. But um, there's a little bit of both in that I do think I think Ruth is redeemed because she stayed as opposed to the other woman. Like we don't know what the other daughter-in-law turned out like in Moab, where she had to go back and like hit the dating scene again. Um, and so I think there's a little bit in which Ruth is redeemed because she decided to stay and she doesn't get treated well all the time, but she is rewarded for playing the role that she plays. Um, on the other hand, I think that the because of the nuance of the threshing room floor and all that could be, and even the really overtly like sexual advance here that would be uncharacteristic of a good, loyal Jewish woman. I think that we see what generosity looks like when it's extended to somebody who ought not to deserve it, or we see what somebody is able to see despite somebody's desperation. And I think we've been talking overall about Ruth's desperation in this moment. So, like, I think Boaz can see that desperation, and instead of turning a cold heart to somebody who is maybe doing something improper, is turning a generous heart to somebody who's desperate enough that has to do something like that. So,
sure, I feel like maybe it's just too simplistic, but I wonder, for me, I wonder if it even matters. I feel like sometimes in our faith and in our study, we feel like we have to figure it all out because it has an implication for whether or not we receive the Holy Spirit or we're able to know when we experience generosity. And the truth is that I feel like sometimes when we assign value to, and we try to say for what reason this thing happened in a person's life, I feel like we just get stuck in the weeds when really I feel like the appropriate thing to do in this moment is to celebrate the fact that redemption happened. And I think that this is common for us, especially with people in our own lives who make decisions that are different from the decisions that we would make ourselves, that we tend to assign value and try to decide whether or not why a person receives redemption or is recovered, right? To use some of the language that they use in Ruth 3. And, maybe it's just simplistic of me, but part of me feels like assigning value in this way actually cheapens the radical love of God.
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. I totally agree. Do you think that the Hebrew author of the book was wanting us simply to celebrate, or do you think there was kind of a causal relationship of redemption and from the author standpoint?
I mean, I can make a whole bunch of guesses, but part of why I think that it is not as necessary for us to assign value, especially with the writing of Ruth, is that this author, I will say he, because we can just assume, right? In a lot of things, we can assume that the author of Ruth, if he's not trying to like pull a Jesus Christ parable here, like he could have been clear. And I feel like the nuance and the innuendo and all of that stuff, like I think that it is unclear for a purpose. And I think that the lack of clarity actually mirrors what we experience in the world and in our own lives intentionally. And I wonder if that like our human, like what just happens to us is that we try so hard to find meaning because we don't want for people who make iffy, sketchy choices to receive more than us.
Right.
And I think that I think that the innuendo and the intentional wordplay, it's not even just innuendo, it's the fact that like words were intentionally used in the original text that had double meanings that could mean more than one thing. And I just think that perhaps it's oversimplifying it to try and assign value where perhaps value does not need to be assigned.
That's a great point. That's really great.
No, it's good. Sorry, I don't even know what's happening. My internet there's one of me, so I don't understand how the internet's overloaded unless somebody guessed my password. But I'm so sorry. I've had more difficulties tonight than usually. David would freeze up once a week. But the last 2 weeks I've had to leave and come back. So my apologies for missing the bulk of that point. I'm going to go back and listen to it later.
It was very smart. Very
Jenna's was
smart.
brilliant. Yes, Jenna's was brilliant. I will say that.
I expect nothing less. Listen, David and I, we've had this discussion. Like, we keep inviting people who are a heck of a lot smarter than us. And so we kind of we're like, hope people still want us to be their pastor around here, and they're not going to start asking for some of y'all to come over because they're realizing just how smart of friends we make. So anyways,
John Underwood, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say that John Underwood used to tell people that whenever you have a guest pastor or a guest teacher, you should always tell your church that they're the smartest person that you know, so that if they're not, if you turn out to be a better speaker, teacher, pastor, then you're better than the smartest person that you know. And if they are actually the smartest person that you know, and they prove to be so, then you were just being honest. So you can use that if you need to.
That's fabulous. I mean, everyone at Creekwood now knows that we're going to use it, but it's fine. We'll see who watches on Wednesday nights now.
Yeah.
So I want to close. We've only got about 7 minutes. I want to honor our time. I want to close with a question. Again, I think I just want to give us this. I like to end on the positive, especially in some of these texts where I can tend I made a joke today, David, you missed it, at the clergy gathering, and I had said, a lot of you don't know me very well, and so you need to know that cynicism is actually my first language, and criticism is my second, and sarcasm is my third, and then English. So where I can really be battling cynicism when I read scripture, in particular this passage, right? Part of me just wants to get upset and talk about the unfairness of it all. And this came straight from Danielle, so it's not my question. But this book rarely mentions God. It doesn't mention God, and yet we can see God working. We see God working to redeem Ruth through Boaz, to redeem Naomi through Boaz, for each of the women to be redeemed through their relationship to one another. So where in your life, or I'll extend it to in your ministry if you'd prefer, have you seen or have you experienced kind of this where people rarely associate or assign something to God, but we find God there? So where is God not named, but you can see God working?
So the first thing that I think of was one of the more spiritual experiences I've ever had was the U2 concert I went to in Atlanta back in 2006. And I've since had that similar experience at, I'm trying to think. We went to Mumford and Sons. We went to a few other concerts that were, it was just the togetherness of it all. And it was one of those experiences. And I'm not saying just inclusion and diversity is just everything about the kingdom, but it was one of those moments in which, we were all going to the threshing room floor together. We were all leaving there together. We were all kind of, just into it. We didn't care what we had done the previous 15 minutes. We were just there in that moment. And, for time to stop like that is really something I think that God has a hand in. And bringing people together over good. And there's a scripture verse that says, every good and perfect thing comes from above. And I really do think that what the author of that scripture speaks of, I've experienced through, I'd like to say sporting events, except sporting events are usually rallied around hatred of the other team as opposed to rooting for your own team. So I'm going to go with concerts, and that I do think you're united around kind of this art that is, and I think art is transcendent.
I mean, so for me, I totally experience that, especially music for me. My goodness, that just is an otherworldly experience in some moments in my life. And I also think, my tendency, at least, especially it feels like right now, is that when things are going really, really well, I really would prefer to take the credit for myself. And that's my natural inclination, is to say, promotion, Jenna, check plus, you did it. go you worked really hard for that. And I think that, you know, I look at just so many of the things around me, and I realize that I often take credit for a lot of things that I had very little to do with.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's privilege, right, that needs to be recognized. And a lot of other times it's, you know, the incredible prevenient grace of God that's going before I even realize that it's going on. And I think that that is probably my biggest tendency where I miss God is just in my own hubris.
Yeah, so I think along that line, one of the other answers I kind of wrote down in my notes was family, which is interesting because like there are people who will refer to their family as their first church, and we have a fair amount of spirituality amongst our family, and we have a fair amount of I mean, really, if you've met my oldest daughter, you'll know that she asks some of the hardest questions that anybody will ever be asked in their life.
Yes,
and
we should
so
put
we
Arden on the board of ordained ministry.
that would be she'd be great.
I'm already through. That's fine.
Yeah.
After I'm through.
Right.
Yeah, girl.
She would, I'm trying to think if she would give you the home field advantage or if she'd grill you harder. Because she trusts you.
It'd be both at the same time somehow.
Probably so, yeah. I'm gonna go ahead and brag too, because Keri Lynn is like fantastic with my girls in terms of patiently answering their questions and showing them grace and being such a great role model for them. Um, the but I kind of like you said, the hubris of it is in those moments in which I see our kids have these like great revelations of kindness or generosity or intelligence, and my natural inclination is like, man, we're great parents, aren't we? And like 3/4 of the time, we could probably look at each other and be like, where did that come from? And it's totally the work of the Spirit. I mean, it's totally just God having blessed our two wonderful girls to have that wisdom that I don't know where it came. It wasn't from me.
Yeah. No, I think both of you bring up really wonderful places. The devotion that I wrote today, in the midst of having a very there's just days where I lose the battle with cynicism, and I was close today when I was writing this devotion. But one of the things that I've been really praying for, and it's almost my like I believe help my unbelief prayer. But I've just been begging God to show me the bright spots of 2020. And what's funny is I kept asking for them and kept asking for them and kept asking for them, and nothing like special or magical happened. Like COVID didn't go away. Just small update for everyone. But I realized that the bright spots are right in front of me. Right. I've just had to open my eyes and take the cynicism away, or look past the cloud of cynicism, perhaps. And they're there. And so I think that's one of the things that, you know, we can sometimes look at, Jenna, like you're saying, like music, like secular music. Well, God's not in that. You know, people would just like brush it off. But if you look for it, I swear God has a lot more to say in a Frankie Valli song than some hymns. You know, David, with family, you know, especially right now, folks are spending so much time with those in their household that, you know, there are rifts and fights and moments of frustration. But to look for those bright spots that God has already gone before us, like you said, Jenna, with prevenient grace and provided for us. It's our job to look past the cloud and to see them. So that is our positive moment to close on. Sometimes I end on the negative, so I tried to shift it today.
Well done.
Oh, well, we do what we can. Cool. So that's all we've got for tonight. Jenna, thank you so much for being our super special, smartest person we've ever met guest.
Absolutely. Until next week, right? Is that what we have to?
That's
next
fine.
week?
That's fine. Yeah.
I mean, we have Blair Thompson White next week, so we've got pretty all-star cast.
I will hand over my crown.
No, we really appreciate you taking the time and just providing your voice and your pastoral insight on this. We really appreciate that. And to everybody who's watching and commenting along, we appreciate you tuning in with us for yet another installment Just a couple of like announcement pieces. Pumpkins for the pumpkin patch are going to be at the church on Friday. If you are feeling strong and would like, or just want a general workout, you can be part of the team that's going to be unloading those. The pumpkin patch will be open until we run out of pumpkins, or until Halloween, I guess. And then we have worship on Sunday. You can sign up to be in person, or as always, we'll be here online for you as well. David, am I missing any major announcements? There's not like a huge event tomorrow I forgot about or something weird?
No, I don't think so. I think I appreciate you launching, not launching the pumpkins, because we do have
Well,
pumpkin launchers at the church.
I
Yeah.
launched the pumpkin patch. No,
You
I
launched the
did nothing.
pumpkins. We actually have 3 pumpkin launchers that a kid built for his Eagle Scout project. So if you do want to, if it reaches November 1st and you're stressed out, Rusty actually led a devotional for staff one time where we went and took extra pumpkins and we just launched them into the pond.
We're going to do prayer stations for All Saints Day, and maybe pumpkin launching should be one of the prayer stations.
I think that could be a grief-reducing, a stress-reducing, grief-reducing prayer station, is just destroy the pumpkin.
Yep.
So, but no, you covered it all.
Send me a picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Awesome. Well, thanks, everybody, for joining us. And I think that's all we've got. So we'll sign off.
Yep. Bye, y'all.
Bye, guys.
Bye.